Good afternoon. My name's Tim Markle. I'm the director of the Southern Regional Center for Children and Youth with Special Health Care Needs out of the Weisman Center. I also serve as co-chair for the Education Committee of the Autism Society of South Central Wisconsin. This is part of our series, Our Hope for the Holidays, which is co-presented by the Southern Regional Center, the Autism Society, as well as the Weisman Center itself. We hope that this series is an opportunity for families to get some ideas about how to help us celebrate and not stress over this winter break. Very excited today to be welcomed by Alyssa Walsh. Alyssa is a licensed psychologist at the Weisman Center. She provides behavioral intervention services to children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorder and their families in the autism treatment programs. Today, she's going to be giving us some helpful hints, strategies, and also taking questions. So have no fear, we will have time for questions about navigating transitions and changes in routines over winter break. Really excited to welcome Alyssa. And with that, I will turn it over to you and I will be quiet at least for 5 minutes. I promise. I'll give you maybe 5 minutes, Alyssa.
Sounds great. Thank you again, Tim. So hello, everyone. As Tim mentioned, I'm a psychologist in the autism treatment programs at the Weisman Center. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am really looking forward to talking together about kind of, as Tim mentioned, navigating some of this upcoming transition to the winter break and some of the changes in routine that are involved with that. At any point, feel free to jump in and ask any questions and or share ideas or strategies that have worked well for you or your family, because that's always important for us to discuss all together and to have those additional ideas as well. All right, let's see, make sure that this is working. Can you see then? Okay, great, wonderful. All right, so there are various definitions of transitions, and one straight from the dictionary reads that it is a passage from one state, stage, subject, or place to another. So another way that we sometimes think about and talk about transitions as well is when we stop one activity and begin another, right? So that's another type of transition that we might be talking about. And transition periods in general often involve change of some sort. And as we know, a change occurs when something becomes different in some way. And we all experience times of transition and changes in our lives, some that we are excited about and looking forward to, and others that maybe we're not and that maybe aren't so positive. And that happens for all of us, right? And in addition to that, sometimes transitions and changes are things that we plan for and that are expected. And there is inevitably, there are changes that happen that occur that are unexpected as well. And some of these changes in our kind of daily routines or our lives might be kind of what we might consider larger scale types of changes, and others might not be. And so these all can kind of impact the different routines that we have in our lives and that we have in our days. And I just noted here a few examples of times of change. This is a very short list. There is, a wide range of what we mean by transitions and changes, but I just thought I would note a few here. So, some might be a time of transition when we move from one place to another, move to a new city, move to a new home. That can certainly involve changes in our daily routines. Another kind of like broader type of transition that is important and that we often talk about is a transition from pediatric care to adult care for individuals. Another type of change that might happen in our day-to-day lives is when we have an appointment that's scheduled. That's not part of our usual routine, going to the dentist, going to the doctor, something of that nature. And school itself really involves a variety of times of transition and change. And that can be when we start a new school year, if we move to a new school district and start in a brand new school, the transition from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school. And then one that we're going to talk a lot more about today is when we have breaks from school, right? That could be a winter break or the summer break or or the spring break, for example. And as another transition that we've all been experiencing recently in relation to school is the transition from in-person learning to virtual learning that we all experienced at some point in the context of this current pandemic that is ongoing. of course, the pandemic itself has brought about many changes in our lives, many that have been, trying and difficult, and that have impacted both our children's schedules as well as our own schedules and daily routines as well, that are likely ongoing changes for many individuals. In addition to that, the holidays in general bring about different types of changes in our days. And thinking about what do we do for different holidays that families might celebrate? What do we do on those days or those periods of days of those holidays? Who do we see? What do we eat? What is in our homes? And where do we go for these types of events? And I just want to note too, so these are different examples of transitions in times of changes and routines, but transitions really do happen every day. So throughout our day, there's so many times when we stop something and start another activity, right? Even within our typical routines. So, when I think about the morning time, you stop showering and then you brush your teeth, and then you stop brushing your teeth, and then you get dressed, and then you finish getting dressed and you do something else. So there's all of these times throughout our day where different types of transitions occur as well. So we're going to talk about them kind of both thinking about transitioning to kind of on a larger scale, as well as some of those day-to-day transitions too, as part of this presentation today. All right, so as I noted, change occurs for everyone. And while there are changes that are positive and the ones that we might look forward to, changes can also be difficult and stressful. And the process of change itself can be challenging as well, even if it's something that we're looking forward to. And as we know, one of the diagnostic features of an autism spectrum disorder is the presence of restricted, repetitive behavior, patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, which can include a preference for sameness or difficulties with changes in routines. Now, I certainly want to note that there are a lot of benefits and useful aspects to sticking to routines, and that should not be overlooked or not recognized. And also, it can make it more challenging when changes do occur, if we are very routine bound in that sense. And we know that individuals with autism do have greater challenges with transitions, such as shifting attention from one task to starting another, or with these kinds of changes in routine. And there might be various reasons for this, such as kind of a greater need for predictability. So for some individuals, it might be more challenges in understanding what activity is coming next, or difficulty when a pattern of behavior is disrupted in some way. And so this increased need for predictability, can very understandably make changes and transitions stressful and very anxiety provoking as well. Uncertainty itself leads to an amount of stress and anxiety. And so it's really important for us to always be thinking about routine changes in routines and transitions from the perspective of the individual with autism, to try to support them with making these times less stressful and challenging. And I think I also want to kind of flip that and think about, for us to understand, why are they helpful? Why are they beneficial, right? They are for all of us. They help make things predictable. When we know what's going to happen, it takes away that uncertainty. It also helps us with knowing what's upcoming. If we have a sequence of events, it takes away that ambiguity, and also makes it less likely that something, that something might happen that I am not expecting within my day. So the upcoming winter break. Oh, were
And
you going to say
Alyssa, can
something?
I just interrupt you really quick?
Yep.
One of the things that you just said just strikes me as the fact that we are right now living in this huge time of ambiguity.
Mhm.
Is that sometimes when we hit transition and change, we could say, this is going to change and then it's going to become normal, or this is going to change and then we're going to do this. But right now, a lot of families are dealing with, it's going to be changing and we're not sure what it's going to look like.
Yep. Yep. You're exactly right, Tim. And that makes it more, it makes it more challenging to not know exactly what is it going to look like, and how long is this period of uncertainty going to last for? Absolutely. I think that's really important to note. Thank you for that, Tim. Um, and that affects too. I mean, it affects so much of our day, and our plans and what's upcoming and whatnot. And thinking about kind of the winter break from school, that, when we think about what are the transitions and changes, so certainly the transition is from being in school to not being in school for part of the day, whether that is in person for your child or virtual at this time. And so there, with the nature of that, there's different activities that are going to be involved in our day, since we won't have those usual classroom meetings or class activities, or for some kids be in the school environment at this time. And then again, these might be things that you're looking forward to or not. But again, we want to try to prepare for some of these upcoming changes that will be happening during this time. So there's 3 different areas that I wanted to delve further into about what might change. And this is different from family to family, depending on what your winter break usually looks like, if and what holidays you celebrate. So there's kind of 3 areas that we'll talk about further that could impact these some different routine changes. Now, as you just brought up, Tim, I wanted to note too that some of the traditional family events or activities that we might participate in during winter, during this winter break or during the holidays might not be able to happen this year, might have to happen in a different way, or might have to happen with fewer people. So that's just important, to, of course, be thinking about and noting too, as we're kind of thinking about these different areas, given the pandemic. And I just want to note too that last week, Erin Thompson gave a presentation as part of this series on navigating the winter holidays and extended family members, and kind of really had some awesome tips for thinking about holiday events and especially within the context of COVID at this time, and preparing for those, whether those be, in person or virtual gatherings. So I would just encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to hear about those really great tips that she shared too. But anyway, so back to kind of some of these 3 areas. So as I mentioned, of course, our daily schedules look different, just given that we are not participating in classroom activities during the winter break, and which is similar to weekends, but in a much extended fashion. Another type of change that might occur for families is the holiday activities. So this can change our routines, because a lot of times events and activities that we do for holidays differ from our day-to-day activities. So we want to prepare our child for who they'll be around, where they'll be, and what they can expect will occur during these different holiday activities, or in general, winter break activities that you might be planning for. And then another area of potential change to be thinking about and preparing for is the home environment. So over the winter break, and if your family celebrates any particular holidays, are there decorations that your family has that you put up around the home, or that changes your home environment in some way? How does your child typically respond to these types of change in their home environment? What about any changes in lights or sounds, if you're thinking about different music, or smells, thinking about what folks might cook that might be unique to different holidays as well, that might be part of these changes that could be upcoming for some families. Okay, so I want to just kind of jump into talking about some tips for kind of trying to ease some of these changes in routines that might occur during the winter break, and to try to set up your child for success with navigating these changes. So we, one of the most important things to think about and do is prepare. How can we prepare for these upcoming changes that might be happening, including ones that we're looking forward to? So one really important strategy in trying to reduce uncertainties in what is upcoming and what your child can anticipate during an activity is to do a lot of foreshadowing. Foreshadowing both schedules and routines for when the winter break is going to start, as well as more specific events that will happen during the winter break. And it's important to note too that the type of foreshadowing can take a variety of different ways, which we'll talk about in a second. But for some individuals, foreshadowing that far in advance and kind of then reviewing what these upcoming changes are going to be on kind of a regular basis is most successful. And for other individuals, that serves to create too much anxiety if it's presented way too far in advance. So we really want to maybe present those changes and foreshadow what's upcoming more closely to when that time of transition or change might happen. And you know your child best in terms of what is most successful for them, and kind of the timeline for foreshadowing some of these upcoming changes. I also should note that, when we're thinking about, upcoming activities in terms of winter break and holiday activities, it's also important to prepare your child for any family traditions that you have again during the winter break or holidays that are not occurring this year for your family, if there are some of those, and to kind of prepare your child for that as well. So there are multiple ways that we can foreshadow some of these upcoming changes. One of, so obviously we can do that verbally, which is beneficial, but for many individuals, pairing visuals with our words can be even more effective. And if you think about it, visuals themselves give a place for our words to stay after they go away, and words go away really quickly. And so and visuals themselves stay. So it provides something that somebody can refer back to, that we've talked about, as well as can be used as a reminder for what's upcoming and kind of a visual check-in. And there's so many different types of visuals that we could use. So it could be a calendar to again show on, a December calendar, a January calendar. When is winter break going to start? When is it going to end? What are any of those kind of main activities that we'll have during that time? For some individuals with autism, using social stories is really helpful, again, to kind of pair our words with pictures and stories of what to expect as part of an event. And social stories can be helpful in many situations, but especially with events that are more novel or that don't happen as often as well. Let's see here. So in addition to kind of thinking about just in general over foreshadowing kind of the upcoming winter break, we want to foreshadow and plan for any changes in the environment and holiday events. So again, who is going to be present? Including people who will be physically present with them, as well as if you have any virtual gatherings planned, who is going to be present virtually, and kind of really kind of outlining that ahead of time. In addition, it's really important that we think about and foreshadow what are the expectations that we have for our child in terms of how they participate in different types of holiday events in particular. And then again, as I mentioned before, how do we foreshadow and plan for changes in the environment? So if you do decorate your home, do we want to do that gradually? Do we have pictures of how our home has looked in previous years that perhaps we can use as a foreshadow for what it's going to look like again during the holiday time? Are there certain areas in the home that maybe we want to leave the same so that there's some amount of consistency and comfort kind of in having some of those fewer changes? So again, I think the biggest part of whatever that change looks like for your family and for your child is how can we prepare for that and how can we foreshadow that and plan for that?
So a couple of things come to mind. Number one, I love the fact that you brought up that each kid is going to be different.
Mhm.
Any of us, any parents who have multiple children know that they're going to be different themselves,
Yep.
much less kids from different families. And so knowing your child well enough to know what may throw them off, what may be that change that just is okay, they're going to roll with it. And then what is that change that the day is going to come to an abrupt stop?
Yep.
And let's plan for those abrupt stops. I'm also wondering too, do you have any other ideas besides a calendar about some ways to visually foreshadow or visually help kids get through the changes in routines?
I sure, yes, absolutely. And I've got a few kind of visuals and whatnot upcoming, but a lot of so the calendar can be really useful for kind of bigger events upcoming, but daily visual schedules are really, really helpful and can be really beneficial. That can take the form of, it could be a checklist, or it could be words with pictures paired together that can include a full day of activities, or it can include a part of a routine, for example. And then we're also going to talk more about other types of visuals that can help support time, like visual countdown timers and clocks and things of that nature. So, yep, absolutely. And if others have other ideas, that would be great to share those too with everyone. Um, Let's see here. So, although parts of our days will be different when your child is in school, is not in school rather, it is beneficial to try to maintain as much of our typical routines as possible to try to have some of that consistency and regularity. So, for example, can the morning routines remain the same, or the bedtime routine, or the schedule for meals? Especially with changes that might be happening at their day in different points, how can we retain some of the routines that we know are helpful and beneficial, and comfortable, during some of these times of transition as well. I also wanted to note that another strategy that can be useful when there are deviations from typical schedules and when some of the usual activities will not occur, such as school activities, is to try to structure our day so that we can make it as predictable as possible. So that doesn't mean that like important downtime is taken away, but rather included as part of the plan for the day. So when you think about, what school activities fill our time during the school days, what's going to fill that time during the winter break, right? And what's going to happen during those parts of the days? So sometimes using those kinds of visual schedules, like planning for and structuring the days such that your child knows when are snacks going to occur, or meal times, or time outside, or electronic time, or quiet time, or whatever that might be for your family, can help to provide, again, more of that predictability for what is going to happen and when that is going to happen in our days. And I don't know about other people, but I feel like the current pandemic has also made structuring our day even more important in some ways, because we're spending so much more time at home. And so we're in one place, we have, we have the same things that we're using over and over again, and spending time with, and it's different than, when we're in different environments and with different people. And so sometimes I think this is happening for a lot of us as adults too, like the things that we spend time with, we're using a lot, so we become satiated or kind of bored with those more quickly, just given the nature that we're spending so much more time with the things in our home. So sometimes thinking about kind of structuring or planning our days can help with that too, to try to keep some amount of novelty in what, activities that are planned or what's happening in our day. And then kind of to your note, Tim, which was really great, is how can we, so visual supports can be really helpful to plan for this upcoming break, but then visual supports can be really useful on a day-to-day basis too, in thinking about the upcoming winter break. So visual schedules support transitions between activity to activity during the day, as well as it helps to foreshadow and see what is coming up next. And if I have to stop something, that really, really fun thing that I want to do and want to spend more time doing, when is that going to happen again in my day? As opposed to have it being unknown, we can show on that schedule when that's going to occur, which can, again, help to reduce that uncertainty and ambiguity during those times. I also wanted to note too that the use of timers or clocks or visual countdown supports can also be really helpful when we're thinking about time. Time is such an abstract concept. It'll happen in a minute or 5 minutes from now, or an hour, or 3 hours. You get into something and what does that mean? What does that feel like? How long is that going to be? And so having different types of something that different visual timers or clocks, depending on what might be best for your child, can be really helpful to make time something that you can see, time something that is more predictable and concrete, for when something will occur, or for how long I have left doing something, my current activity, for example. Let's see here. So I just included kind of a few of these examples that, a calendar or a social story that we could use, that could be used for preparing for what's upcoming for the winter break, and that can be tailored for more specific events that might happen. They actually have some school things included, but the idea is thinking about, a daily schedule, right? So what is going to happen in my day? This was for an afternoon or an evening schedule. Obviously the school bus part is not applicable, but thinking about what is happening, and do we need to break that down for different types or different parts of our day? And are visuals useful? Or first thens, again, thinking about one transition, what tasks we need to do, and then what's the thing that happens right after that? So a lot of these kinds of visual supports can be super helpful in planning and preparing for our day and changes. And then I just wanted to highlight here too some of the the timers that I often use and that I found to be really helpful for thinking about how long is something going to happen, when is something going to happen. The Duck one is a free app that you can download on your phone that I use all the time. And thinking about, you can set a time, and instead of it showing numbers, it shows a picture. And when the picture is finished, that's when the time is up for something. All right, so as we know, changes in routines can be stressful. So we want to ensure, though, that each person has a way to communicate for the need for a break or need for help if they are feeling stressed or overwhelmed, including during holiday events and activities. And use of coping strategies and communicating a need for a break is so important for everyone. And it's a skill that we need to teach and practice over and over, so that it becomes part of our repertoire and something that we know can be effective. It's important, of course, to remember that each person communicates in different ways. So asking for a break or indicating that I might need a break might be like a break icon on their communication device. It might be a break card that we use. It might be a gesture that signals to somebody else like, whoop, this is a little too much. I'm getting a little stressed out. I need some time and I need some space to do something else. Or somebody might use language or their words to say that we need a break as well. But wherever we are, we want to identify what are those break options and where can that person go if we're starting to feel stressed or overwhelmed in those situations. And then, so those are kind of some more what I call like reactive strategies, right? If we're starting to feel frustrated or stressed or overwhelmed, how can we try to reduce that? But also, building in breaks and downtime can be more of a preventative strategy, especially if we know that there's going to be a variety of new activities or changes that are planned for that particular day. And I just wanted to note I do have a list of resources. Tim, I can send that to you, and it's at on the slide after this one actually. And so thinking about what are some of those coping strategies that are best for our child. And this is just a visual of just kind of some examples. And it's from a really helpful resource on a toolkit on supporting individuals with autism through uncertain times. That's more specific to COVID, but that is a really great resource as well. And then this is something that I think is so important. So I just had to include this in here too, that remember that behavior is a form of communication. Like I said, we all communicate in different ways. We might communicate with a device, or sign language, gestures, and behaviors. Kind of observable behaviors are such as becoming upset, are another way of communicating something. I need something. I need somebody. I don't want something to happen. I'm not ready for something to happen, or something kind of internally either feels good or not so good. So we always want to be thinking about what is that person communicating and how can we teach them another way to communicate that same message or that same thing for what they need. And so that's kind of the idea behind the break is if we're getting frustrated and overwhelmed, understandably, how are we communicating that to other people so that we and into our our parents around us, so that we can support that individual too with providing that break and providing that space when needed. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we want to think about how we can reinforce positive behaviors that we are seeing, such as, managing these changes in routines, participating in activities, using coping strategies. How can we praise and encourage use of these skills through pairing a lot of positive consequences with these skills, especially during this time when there's a lot of changes and whatnot happening in the environment.
One of the things that I think about is that as we talk about children, I'm sitting here going, wait, 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 wait. I need these coping strategies. I need to look at the activities I have coming up or what's going to happen in my life. And if I already know that there are some things that are going to be overwhelming for me or things that I'm not going to enjoy so much, what's my plan?
Yes.
How am I going to plan for that instead of just allowing the same thing to happen over and over again?
Yep.
And so plan the time limits for me. Plan for, how long am I going to stay somewhere? Maybe I don't really have to go somewhere. Maybe I can use COVID as an excuse this year
Mm-hmm.
to not do something that is normally just so stressful to me.
Yep.
But also look at the adults in my life too. What behavior are they trying to communicate? Because as adults, we get really good at saying one thing, but our face and our bodies say something entirely different. And so trying to learn what are the adults in our life also communicating so that we can have a better experience overall. So that we're aware of all these things so that things can go smoother. Because
Absolutely.
we don't like surprises in behavior. whether it's from a child or from an adult. Surprise behavior usually is not great.
Mhm.
Um, so just that I'm just sitting here thinking, wow, I need some of these personally as well.
Same here. I think this is so much of this is applicable to all of us as parents, as adults as well, and thinking about, like you said, Tim. So we're talking a lot about it from our child's experience, but also it's important to think about our own experience too, and kind of what are we thinking about going into the winter break and holiday activities, and what would be most useful for us, which impacts our child as well too. Then, so absolutely, I completely agree with you. And actually, so that was everything. That was the end. And here are some just resources that so perfect timing, Tim. Here are some resources from some of the different websites and that I can certainly share too with you, Tim, in a different way if that would be best. In thinking about preparing for some of these upcoming changes.
Oh, that is fantastic. And so we would like to save time. We have one question in the chat that we will get to. I appreciate that question. Want to look first at holidays and any questions people might have around this whole transition time around the holidays and from school to winter break, along with, totally echoing what Alyssa said. um, I know some of you people on this call, and I know you have strategies. I know
Uh-huh,
you have dealt with this.
uh-huh.
So feel free to, I will watch you on mute, or feel free to put it into the chat, and then I will gladly be your voice, whichever way. But please feel free to share either things that have worked for you or questions that you might have for Alyssa.
Yes, please. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
And in the meantime, I'm going to have to try to figure out how to help people in my life to reinforce my positive behaviors. I'm like, wow, I wish I had somebody who would go around and continually encourage me.
It's true.
Uh,
It's true. It is. It's so important. Reinforcement it happens for all of us in our daily lives in different ways. Um, and it is. It's critical for all of us, for kids and adults alike. It's just
Absolutely.
the source of those changes as we get older as well. Yeah.
I am not seeing any unmute, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question that came up in the chat.
Wonderful.
And I know the age you generally work with at Waysman,
Yeah.
so please feel free to generalize.
Okay.
But the question is, how can we care for those with ASD who may have trouble transitioning from their high school years to college life? That is such a huge transition that involves, it could involve moving, it could involve changing healthcare providers, it involves changing possibly an environmental, a school and educational system. So are there some general tips that we can, to help that transition from high school to college or adult life?
Yeah, that's such an important question, and something that's so important to think about and kind of and plan for, because I so appreciate kind of how that question was worded too, because when you think about the transition from finishing school to either going to secondary school or work or whatever that might look like, there's so many aspects of change that are involved with that. Where you live, who you spend time with your social networks potentially,
Hmm.
your healthcare providers, depending on where you live and what you're doing, transportation. There's so many different aspects
Yeah.
of that. So the first thing that I kind of think about is, trying to identify what are these different areas of change that might happen, and then kind of taking a deeper look into, okay, how can we plan for and support that young adult in each of these
Mhm.
different areas. And there's there's some great programs in kind of thinking about that time, depending on what you're what the focus of what you're preparing for is at that particular point. So if you're thinking about the medical transition, talking with pediatric providers about who they know have experience with young adults with autism that they may be able to connect you with. In addition to thinking about schools, as you're getting if your child has an IEP, part of that will be a transition planning process of what is upcoming,
Yes.
and so that can be a place to kind of start thinking about that and planning for that as well. And then I also, again, because there's so many different areas of change that can occur, also talking to, and, you know, parents themselves are, of course, like the main experts in thinking about what has my experience been, what have I had to, you know, what have been the things that we've thought about and planned for. And so parents can be a huge source and kind of support network too for thinking about some of these changes. Um, and in addition to, I think about, you know, just different toolkits that are out there in exploring some of these changes. I believe there's one on kind of on the Autism Speaks website that thinks about that change
Hmm.
during that particular time. There's some different programs that focus as well on that period of transition or change. I think about one in particular, like the Transitioning Together program, and thinking about, you know, what is all happening during that.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite transition related websites is the Pacer Center out of Minnesota. Just tons of information. One things that I learned as a parent of a 22-year-old, that goes back to something you said earlier, is understanding who my kid is and what is a good time for him to transition. And it seems that society puts us onto this train ride
Mhm,
of these are the years that you'll be in kindergarten, you'll do preschool, then you're going to do kindergarten, then you're going 1 through 8, and then you're going to go 9 to 12, and then you're going to go to higher education, and then you're going to, and no one stops to think, is this good for everybody? Is this really the best train ride? And so with my son, we work so hard at getting him through high school. And he works so hard at having to concentrate and focus and just every day there's homework and every day there's some other demand on him. Is that when we talk to him about college, higher education, anything else, he's like, why would I want to do that? And then we're just like, why do we want him to do that? And so we made a very conscious decision with him to just break from school for a little while. He's now going back and taking classes occasionally at Madison Technical College, but there was no way that kiddo was going to go from high school straight to college. He would have been burned out totally by the time he was 22.
mhm,
And so know your child. Know what the options are for them. Keep them engaged in life, but don't necessarily buy into what society says is what every 18-year-old should be doing, every 19-year-old should be doing. Your child should be doing what your child should be doing. So just knowing your kid is really important. And Erin points out in the chat box that there is Family Voices webinar called What's After High School that is available on the Family Voices website as a download. Also, yeah, their website, and by the way, Family Voices website, I was on a call earlier. For whatever reason, their website is not working today. So I've had numerous people try to access their website today. It's just there's something glitchy going on. So eventually, you'll be able to get to it, but it's called What's After High School. It gives a wonderful overview of all things transition. It's also offered a number of times a year through the regional centers. We'll partner with Family Voices to offer the What's After High School. So keep your eyes on out for that as well.
absolutely. Um, Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Tim. I so appreciate you sharing, and I so, you know, kind of what I so agree with you is, you know, the expectations, what is best for our child, our young
Yeah.
adult, and not formed by what society might think itself is best, or what is expected, I should say. I
See,
so
yeah,
agree
it's
with
those
you.
expectations. Yep,
Yep,
I love the way you put that.
yep,
Is what's expected, and then having to explain to people why we're not meeting that expectation.
mhm,
This is what we're going to do because it's best for us.
yep,
Thanks for your input. We're still going to do what's best for us.
exactly. Mhm.
Any final questions or comments or interactions? I don't want to feel like I've been totally dominating Alyssa's time here, so please feel free. But then again, I thought it was a fantastic presentation, and there's a lot to implement from it. There's a lot of things to break down and say, okay, this is coming up. How can we prepare for it?
Mhm.
And that's one of my main takeaways: is to look ahead. Don't let life always just happen to you.
Mhm.
Is there some things that can be planned for? Do you have any final thoughts, Alyssa, or summations?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, kind of thinking about um, your child, and your child best, and thinking in what will this upcoming winter break look like for you and your family, and what strategies have been most effective for your child, and then how can we, as you said, Tim, kind of my biggest thing is how can we plan for it, how can we prepare for it, and trying to decrease some of that stress. We would never be wanting to add stress
Right.
as part of your day. That's also important for me to note too. But what can we do to plan for it, and to try to make things as less stressful as possible for the child, but the entire
Yes.
family during this time.
Love it. Well, thank you, Alyssa, so much for taking time out of your day to be with us again. Really appreciate it. I will put the PowerPoint into a format that I can then send out, and I will. I think I should be able to pull off if you linked the resources
Mhm.
on the website slide. If you send me just the, I won't send me this. Yeah, just send me the slides, and then I'll
Sounds
pull out that resource page separately. Add the Pacer Center as well as Family Voices website and the Regional Center, so we have all those resources together. But I really do appreciate the thoughtfulness and the time that you spent with us. I would like to invite people to, if they haven't registered already, we have one more. Hope for the holidays coming up, and then you're on your own. I've done what I can do. But we're going to talk next week about moving, sensing, and feeling. We're going to have an occupational therapist and the director of the Children's Therapy Network. Jen Blusky is going to be, and I probably just slaughtered poor Jen's last name. I'll make sure I learn how to pronounce that before next week. But please, I hope you come back and join us next week when we talk about moving, sensing, and feeling. So again, Alyssa, thank you. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to take part in this conversation. We appreciate it. Have a
Yes,
great
thank you,
day.
everyone.